The dark ritual and the unexpected savior. The twin moons cast an eerie glow over the ancient stone altar, their silver light barely piercing the thick smoke rising from the burning torches. A vast crowd of robed figures surrounded the temple grounds, their deep chants filling the air with a chilling hum. The smell of incense and blood mixed together, creating a scent that spoke of countless sacrifices made before. At the center of the altar, a young alien girl, barely past childhood, lay bound in heavy chains. Her violet skin shimmered under the firelight, her silver eyes wide with fear. She struggled against the bindings, but they were too strong. She was helpless. The high priest stood above her, his dark robes flowing as he raised a long curved dagger. His deep voice echoed through the temple. The gods demand balance. Blood must be given. The crowd roared in approval. They believed this sacrifice would bring prosperity, that the gods would bless their planet with another cycle of peace. No one questioned the ritual. No one ever did. Except tonight. A voice cut through the ceremony like a blade. Stop. The crowd gasped and turned. A human stepped forward. He was unlike any of them, tall, broad-shouldered, and battle-worn. His dark jacket was torn from past fights, his boots covered in dust from long travels. His sharp eyes locked onto the high priest, unshaken by the army of alien warriors around him. The high priest's lips curled into a sneer. A human. You dare interfere in the will of the gods. The man's jaw tightened. I don't see any gods here. Just a bunch of cowards hiding behind tradition. Murmurs ran through the crowd. No one had ever challenged the ritual before. No one had dared. The high priest turned back to the altar. You are nothing. This sacrifice must happen. He raised the dagger higher. The human moved. Fast. In one motion, he grabbed a heavy torch from its holder and threw it across the temple. Flames exploded over the ceremonial banners, casting wild shadows across the stunned faces of the crowd. Chaos erupted. The alien warriors, caught off guard, reached for their weapons, but the human was already on the altar. With a single strike, he knocked the high priest back. The dagger clattered to the ground. The girl gasped as the human knelt beside her. Hold still. With a swift motion, he snapped the chains with brute force. For the first time in her life, she was free. The crowd was no longer silent. Seize him, the high priest bellowed. The human turned, fists clenched. The alien warriors lunged at him, spears gleaming under the firelight. He fought like a beast. A warrior swung a blade at his head. He ducked and drove his elbow into the attacker's gut. Another charged with a spear. He sidestepped and smashed the butt of the weapon into their face. Every move was precise, honed by years of survival. But there were too many of them. The girl watched in shock as he was surrounded. The warriors closed in, their weapons raised. The high priest laughed. Foolish human, you think you can fight the will of the gods. You will take her place. The warriors grabbed him, pinning his arms behind his back. The crowd erupted in cheers. The high priest picked up the fallen dagger and walked toward the human, his eyes burning with rage. Your defiance ends here. The human gritted his teeth, struggling against the warriors holding him. His gaze flickered toward the girl. She was still free. Run, he whispered. She hesitated, her heart pounding. No one had ever fought for her before. No one had ever cared. The high priest raised the dagger again, this time aimed at the human's chest. Then something happened. A deep, inhuman growl echoed through the temple. The torches flickered wildly. The crowd fell into stunned silence. The high priest froze, his grip on the dagger loosening. The earth trembled beneath them. The girl's silver eyes widened. Something was coming, and it was angry. The fight against the gods. The temple walls trembled as the deep, guttural growl echoed through the sacred grounds. The flickering flames of the torches bent unnaturally, casting long, twisting shadows over the gathered crowd. The high priest, his once confident smirk now frozen in disbelief, turned his gaze toward the darkness beyond the altar. Something ancient had awakened. The human, still held in the iron grip of the temple guards, did not flinch. His sharp eyes took in every movement, every breath of hesitation from the robed figures around him. He had seen fear before. This was something else. The girl, still trembling from her near sacrifice, took a hesitant step back. Her silver eyes glowed faintly in the dim light, reflecting something shifting in the darkness. Then, the beast stepped into view, a creature of pure nightmare, towering above them all. It had 4 jagged arms, clawed hands that gleamed like obsidian, and a face hidden beneath a smooth, featureless mask. Black mist coiled from its body, moving like it was alive. The crowd gasped in unison. This was the entity they worshipped, the one they had sacrificed countless lives for. And it was real. The high priest, stunned at first, quickly regained his composure. He turned to the people, arms wide. His voice filled with newfound power. "Behold, the gods have arrived to witness the blood sacrifice." The alien warriors, their grip on the human tightening, bowed in deep reverence. The chanting began again, this time louder, faster, almost desperate. But the human, he only grinned. "Doesn't look very friendly," he muttered. The beast tilted its head slightly, as if sensing something new, something out of place. Then, in a blur of unnatural speed, it lunged forward. A single clawed hand slammed down where the girl had been standing just seconds ago. She barely managed to roll aside, the stone altar cracking under the force of the impact. Dust and debris flew into the air. The crowd screamed. Some ran, others fell to their knees, their faith turning to terror. The girl looked up, straight into the beast's empty, hollow gaze. It wasn't going to stop. It wanted blood. The human's mind raced. He could barely move, still restrained by the guards, and the creature was seconds away from killing the girl. Not happening. With a sudden, brutal twist of his body, he yanked one of the warriors off balance, forcing him forward. The alien stumbled, and before he could react, the human drove his knee into the warrior's ribs, hearing a sickening crunch. One down. Another tried to swing a spear at his head. He ducked, then headbutted the attacker so hard that the warrior collapsed instantly. 2 down. The third one hesitated, realizing too late that he had underestimated the human. That was his mistake. The human grabbed the spear from the fallen guard, spun it in his hands, and drove the blunt end straight into the alien's stomach. The warrior hit the ground, gasping for air. All 3 were down. The human didn't waste a second. He turned, grabbed the girl's wrist, and ran. The high priest screamed in fury. "Stop them!" The warriors hesitated, but only for a moment. The chase began. The temple grounds were massive, a maze of towering pillars, sacred statues, and long winding corridors that stretched into darkness. The human and the girl raced through the shadows, dodging past crumbling structures and leaping over broken steps. Behind them, the thunderous footsteps of the beast echoed, shaking the very foundation of the temple. It was hunting them. The girl's breath came in sharp gasps. Where are we going?" The human didn't answer immediately. He could hear the warriors closing in from the sides. They were being cornered. They needed a way out. And then he saw it, a massive stone doorway leading down into the ruins beneath the temple. It was old, forgotten, and untouched by the high priest's followers. A perfect place to disappear. "Down there," he ordered, pulling her toward it. She hesitated, staring at the entrance. But a spear whizzed past her head, embedding itself into the stone beside her. That made the decision for her. She ran. They reached the stairway just as the beast leaped from above, landing on all 4s with an earth-shaking impact. It was blocking their path. The human acted on pure instinct. He grabbed a broken torch from the ground and hurled it directly at the monster's face. The creature shrieked in rage, its featureless mask cracking slightly from the impact. That was the opening they needed. The human shoved the girl forward. Go. Now. She stumbled but didn't stop. She ran down the steps into the darkness. The human followed, just as the beast let out a deafening roar and lunged forward again. Slam! The heavy stone doors shut behind them, plunging them into silence. Only the sound of their ragged breathing remained. For the first time since the ritual began, they were safe. For now. The girl looked at the human, eyes wide, body still trembling. You saved me. The human exhaled, rolling his shoulders. Yeah, kind of my thing. She hesitated. But why? He turned to look at her. For the first time, she noticed the scars on his face, the hardened look in his eyes. This wasn't his first fight. And it wouldn't be his last. Because someone had to, he finally said. The girl lowered her gaze. No one had ever cared before. Not her own people. Not even her family. But this human. He was different. And for the first time, she felt something new. Hope. The girl's secret and the truth about the sacrifice. The silence beneath the temple was suffocating. The air was thick with dust, untouched by time, and the dim glow of the twin moons barely reached through the cracks in the ancient stone above. The human pressed his ear against the heavy stone doors they had just slammed shut. Beyond them, the muffled sounds of the high priest's warriors echoed through the ruined temple above. Shouts, orders, the beast's unnatural growl. They were still being hunted. But for now, they had a moment. He turned to the girl, who sat on the cold ground, her arms wrapped around herself. Her silver eyes stared blankly at the floor, her body still trembling. She had nearly died tonight. And if the human hadn't stepped in, she wouldn't be alive right now. She exhaled sharply and looked at him. Why did you save me? The human leaned against the wall, folding his arms. His sharp eyes studied her for a long moment before he finally spoke. Because I don't like seeing innocent people die. She flinched, gripping her arms tighter. I wasn't innocent, she muttered. I was chosen. The human scoffed. Chosen for what? To be slaughtered on an altar. She looked away, her silver eyes dim with doubt. It's an honor, she whispered as if trying to convince herself. They believe my death would have brought balance. That our gods. Your gods aren't real. The words came out sharper than he intended, but he didn't regret them. He had seen too many people die in the name of unseen deities. The girl didn't argue. She had believed in the gods all her life, but tonight, something changed. The human sighed, crouching in front of her. Look, kid, whatever they told you, it's a lie. Sacrifices don't bring balance. They bring fear, and fear is a powerful tool for people like that high priest. She swallowed hard. Deep down, she had always felt something was wrong, but no one had ever questioned it. Until now. The human stood up, dusting off his jacket. We can sit here and talk about your gods, or we can find a way out of here before that thing upstairs breaks down the door. She hesitated, but then nodded. Okay. Together, they stepped deeper into the ruins. The hidden truth beneath the temple. The tunnel stretched far beneath the city, twisting into forgotten chambers that smelled of damp stone and old secrets. The human moved ahead cautiously, his sharp senses on high alert. The girl, though still shaken, followed closely. Her fingers brushed against the walls as they walked. The strange symbols carved into the stone felt familiar. Too familiar. Then the corridor widened into an ancient hall, its ceiling lined with shattered crystal lights that flickered weakly. At the center stood a massive, broken statue of a woman, her face eerily similar to the girl's. The girl's breath hitched. I know this place. The human frowned. What do you mean? She stepped forward, eyes wide, heart pounding. Flashes of memories, not her own, flooded her mind. A grand city, a ruling family, a powerful bloodline. A betrayal. She gasped, stumbling backward. The human caught her before she hit the ground. Hey, what's wrong? She shook her head, gripping his arm as if to steady herself. I don't know. It's like I saw something. Like I was here before." The human glanced around the chamber. Something was off. Then he spotted it. An inscription at the base of the statue, covered in dust and cracks. He knelt, brushing away the dirt. The words were ancient, but he recognized enough of the script to piece it together. The last blood. The chosen one shall rise. The false prophet shall fall. His pulse quickened. The high priest lied. The girl wasn't chosen for sacrifice. She was the last of a lost bloodline. The rightful heir to something the high priest didn't want the people to remember. And if the human figured it out, then so did the high priest. Which meant, boom. The temple above them shook violently. Dust rained from the ceiling. The girl gasped, grabbing onto the human as the ground trembled beneath them. The beast was trying to break through. The human cursed under his breath. "Time's up. We need to move." But the girl wasn't listening. She was staring at the inscription, her hands trembling. "They lied to me," she whispered. The human placed a firm hand on her shoulder. "Yeah, kid. They did. And they're not gonna stop until they make sure you're dead." Her silver eyes flickered with something new. Not just fear. Determination. She clenched her fists. "Then we make sure they don't win." The human smirked. That's the spirit. The high priest's betrayal and the alien conspiracy. The ruins trembled beneath their feet as dust swirled through the ancient tunnels. The air was thick with tension, heavy with the presence of something old and dangerous. The high priest stood at the entrance, flanked by his warriors. His golden eyes gleamed in the dim firelight, his dark robes billowing as the energy of the temple pulsed around him. Behind him, the beast loomed, its featureless mask cracked from the earlier battle. It growled low, the sound rattling the very bones of the structure. The human adjusted his stance, planting his feet firmly on the stone floor. His sharp eyes flicked over the warriors, counting them, measuring their strength. 12 armed soldiers, 1 massive monster, and 1 lying priest who thought himself a god. He smirked. "Seems fair." The girl, now standing taller than before, clenched her fists at her sides. The firelight reflected off her violet skin, and in that moment, she looked almost regal, like someone born for this moment. The high priest stepped forward, his voice a whisper of venom. "You dare to defile the sacred ground with your human presence?" The human tilted his head. "Yeah, well, you guys don't exactly roll out the welcome mat." The warriors tightened their grips on their weapons. The beast snarled, its claws scraping against the stone. But the girl wasn't afraid anymore. She took a step forward, her voice steady. "You lied to me." The high priest blinked, then smiled, a slow predatory grin. "Lied." He spread his arms. "Child, you were chosen. Your death would have saved our people." The girl shook her head. "No, my death would have kept you in power." A ripple of unease passed through the warriors. A few glanced at each other, doubt creeping into their rigid postures. The high priest's smile faltered. Just for a second. The human caught it. "Good. He's nervous." The girl continued. "I saw the truth. I saw the past. My people didn't worship the gods. We ruled. And you." She narrowed her silver eyes. "You destroyed us." The high priest's face darkened. Then, without warning, he raised his hand. The beast lunged. The human barely had time to shove the girl aside before claws slashed down, carving deep trenches into the stone floor where they had stood a moment ago. The warriors charged. The fight exploded in a whirlwind of movement. The human grabbed a broken spear from the ruins, spinning it in his hands. The first warrior swung at him. He ducked, twisted, and drove the blunt end of the weapon into the attacker's gut. Another came from the side. The human sidestepped just in time, catching the alien's arm and twisting it behind his back before shoving him into the next attacker. The girl, unarmed but no longer helpless, moved with purpose. A warrior grabbed her wrist. She slammed her knee into his chest and yanked free. Another came for her, but she ducked just as the human kicked a loose stone in their direction, knocking them off balance. The beast, meanwhile, was a different problem. It moved too fast for something so massive, shifting through the shadows like living smoke. Its claws slashed through the air, barely missing the human's throat as he dodged backward. The high priest watched, unbothered, because he knew something they didn't. And then, the girl stumbled. The human turned just in time to see the high priest raise his hand again, chanting in a language older than the temple itself. The girl cried out as her body seized, her glowing silver eyes widening in pain. The human's heart slammed in his chest. What the hell was happening? The high priest smirked. "You are of royal blood, child. And that means you are bound to the gods. Bound to me." The girl fell to her knees, gasping, as an invisible force wrapped around her. The human snapped. He didn't think, didn't plan. He moved. With a roar, he charged straight through the remaining warriors, knocking one aside like a ragdoll. The high priest barely had time to react before the human's fist connected with his jaw. The priest staggered back, stunned. The human grabbed him by the front of his robes and slammed him against the stone wall. "Let her go." The high priest's lips curled, blood dripping from the corner of his mouth. "Foolish human, you do not understand what you are fighting." The human pulled him closer. "Then explain it to me." The priest's golden eyes gleamed. "I serve no god." The human froze. The girl gasped for air, the force around her weakening. The high priest laughed softly. "The gods you defy, they are not divine. They are not holy." He leaned in, whispering, "They are the ones who created us." The human's blood ran cold. The high priest pushed him back, raising both hands. The ruins rumbled. Something stirred beneath them. The girl clutched her head as a sudden wave of energy surged through the temple. Ancient carvings lit up along the walls, glowing with an eerie blue light. The air crackled with something old, unnatural, alive. The high priest's voice boomed through the chamber. "You cannot stop what has already begun." The girl forced herself up, her silver eyes burning with fury. "No." She stepped forward, shaking off the last remnants of his power. "I will stop it." And then, she raised her hand. The ruins answered her. A surge of raw, ancient energy burst from the walls, knocking the high priest back. The beast let out a deafening roar, suddenly hesitant. The girl's breath came in ragged gasps. She felt it now. The truth. The power inside her. The human grinned. "At a girl." Awakening the lost power. The air inside the ancient ruins felt alive. It pulsed, crackled with unseen energy, whispering through the crumbling stone like a ghost from another time. The girl stood at the center of it all. Her silver eyes glowed in the dim firelight, her breath steady despite the power surging around her. She had felt it the moment the high priest's spell broke. This temple, these ruins, they weren't just old stones and forgotten history. They were a key. The human adjusted his grip on his weapon, scanning their surroundings. The high priest and his beast had vanished into the shadows, but that didn't mean they were safe. The ruins trembled like they were waking up, like they had been waiting for her. He turned to her. "What just happened?" The girl took a slow breath, her fingers brushing the carved stone beneath her feet. Symbols pulsed faintly beneath the dust, responding to her presence. "I don't know," she admitted, but the way she said it, it wasn't fear. It was understanding. The human sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Well, let's figure it out before more of your friends try to kill us." She tensed at that, but she didn't deny it. The people who had wanted her dead all her life, they weren't her people anymore. They never were. She clenched her fists. "There's something deeper in these ruins, something important." The human raised a brow. "And you know this because..." She hesitated, then turned toward a darkened corridor, where the glow of ancient inscriptions lined the walls. Because I can feel it calling me. The descent into the forgotten chamber. The deeper they went, the more the ruins changed. What had once been cracked stone and collapsed ceilings became something else entirely. Smooth metal surfaces, strange glowing symbols, walls that hummed like they were alive. The human stopped, running his fingers over one of the walls. It wasn't natural. It wasn't made. It was grown. "This isn't just an old temple," he muttered. The girl looked up. "It's a ship." His eyes snapped to hers. "What?" She turned, stepping carefully onto a circular platform in the center of the corridor. The symbols beneath her feet pulsed once, then lit up, bright and golden, casting a soft glow over the chamber. The human tensed, gripping his weapon. "Okay, what did you just?" The ground shifted. A low hum filled the air, followed by the grinding sound of stone against metal. The platform descended, taking them deeper into the ruins. No, into the ship buried beneath them. The human cursed under his breath. "This just keeps getting better." The girl barely heard him. Her heart was pounding. This ship, it wasn't just a buried relic. It was awake. And it had been waiting for her. The truth about the gods. The platform stopped with a soft hiss. They stepped into a massive chamber, its ceiling stretching high above them. Glowing consoles lined the walls, flickering weakly like dying embers. At the center of the room, a massive crystalline structure floated above a circular dais, suspended in the air by unseen forces. It pulsed with raw energy. The girl's breath caught. "This is it." The human crossed his arms. "Care to explain what this is?" She took a step forward, reaching out toward the crystal. As her fingers brushed its surface, a wave of information flooded her mind. Memories, histories, truths buried for centuries. She saw them. Her people, once rulers, not worshippers. They had been scientists, explorers, warriors. And the gods they had feared. They were not divine. They were their creators. No, not creators. Their jailers. She gasped, staggering backward. The human caught her before she collapsed. Hey, talk to me, kid." She clutched his arm, her silver eyes wide with realization. "The gods aren't gods. She swallowed, trying to process it. "They're the ones who took everything from us. They erased our history. They made us forget." The human's jaw clenched. He didn't like the sound of that. "You're saying these gods are real?" She nodded slowly. "And they're coming back." The human ran a hand down his face. "Of course they are." He had seen enough wars to recognize one before it started. And this was a war waiting to happen. The High Priest's final play. A sudden shockwave rattled the chamber. The human spun, weapon raised, as a dark portal split open at the far end of the room. A familiar figure stepped through. The High Priest. But he wasn't alone. The beast was there, but it was different now. Its mask was cracked, its form shifting, growing, its body morphing into something less physical, more energy than flesh. And behind them, a shimmering rift in space. The human's stomach dropped. Something was coming through. Something big. The High Priest's golden eyes burned with triumph. "You are too late, child. The gods have heard my call." The girl stepped forward, her silver eyes steady. "No," she said. "They've heard mine." The entire ship rumbled. And then the floating crystal behind her exploded with light. The human barely had time to react before the energy surged through the girl, wrapping around her in waves of power. She didn't scream. She didn't flinch. She embraced it. The High Priest's smirk vanished. Impossible. The girl looked at him. For the first time, she wasn't afraid. For the first time, she wasn't running. She was rising. The final battle. Man versus a god. The ancient ship shook violently, its walls pulsing with golden energy as if it were breathing. The floating crystal at the chamber's center flared, sending waves of power through the room. And in the center of it all, the girl stood, glowing. Raw energy crackled around her, lifting dust and shattered stone from the ground. Her silver eyes burned like twin stars, her hair whipping in an invisible wind. The power of her ancestors, the truth buried beneath centuries of lies, had awoken inside her. She was no longer the sacrifice. She was the weapon. Across the chamber, the high priest's expression had twisted from arrogance to fear. He had never expected this. The human, standing at her side, cracked his knuckles. His sharp eyes flicked between the high priest, the beast that had grown more monstrous, and the rift in the air, a gaping wound in reality. And something was coming through. He sighed. So just so we're clear, we're fighting a god. The girl didn't even blink. We're stopping a monster. The human grinned. Good enough for me. Then, the world exploded. The arrival of the god. From the widening rift, something huge began to materialize, a form that wasn't fully flesh, wasn't fully machine. It was something else. A titanic figure, shifting and flickering like an image from a broken screen. Long, segmented limbs stretched outward, warping in and out of reality. 6 eyes, blacker than the void of space, opened at once. And the moment it looked at them, the human felt it. Not just in his mind, not just in his body, in his soul. A pressure so heavy it felt like the universe itself was leaning down on him, crushing him into the ground. His heart slammed against his ribs. His vision darkened. He had faced warlords, assassins, entire fleets of enemies. But this thing wasn't just a creature. It was something greater. A being that had existed before memory, before civilizations. And now it had returned. A deep, inhuman voice echoed through the chamber, vibrating the walls. UAVFAILEDUS. Mortal. The high priest collapsed to his knees, his golden eyes wide with terror. He clutched his chest, his entire body shaking. I summoned you, he gasped. I am your servant. The god's 6 eyes shifted toward him. And then, it reached down. The high priest screamed. The human barely had time to process what was happening before the being touched its own so-called servant. For a fraction of a second, the high priest's body flickered. And then, he was erased. Not burned, not crushed. Just gone. As if he had never existed. The silence that followed was absolute. The beast, once bound to the high priest's command, let out a roar of fury and terror, backing away from its own god. The human swallowed. Well, that's new. The girl clenched her fists. It's not a god. The human exhaled. Could have fooled me. The entity turned its 6 eyes on them. And the moment it did, the battle began. The fight for survival. The god thing moved fast. Faster than anything that massive should have been able to. One of its segmented limbs swung toward them, tearing through the air. The human barely had time to grab the girl and dive aside before the impact shattered the entire floor. Stone and metal flew everywhere, the shockwave hurling them both backward. The girl rolled to her feet, energy crackling in her hands. She wasn't running. Not anymore. She threw her hand forward. A wave of golden light surged from her palm, slamming into the creature's chest. It staggered. Not much, but it noticed. And for the first time, it hesitated. The girl took a step forward, her silver eyes burning. You controlled my people. You erased our history, but I remember now. She raised her arms. The ancient ship responded, its walls lighting up, the energy pulsing toward her. The power of her ancestors, the knowledge they had tried to destroy. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for an entire lost civilization. The god shrieked. The human, still catching his breath, sought his opening. He grabbed the nearest broken spear, a jagged shard of ancient metal, and ran, straight for the god. The girl kept its focus on her, sending wave after wave of power. And the human. He leaped, twisting midair, and drove the spear straight into the thing's massive, flickering eye. The god screamed. The entire ship shook. For the first time in centuries, the creature felt pain. It reeled back, its form glitching, warping, collapsing in on itself. The girl, sweat dripping down her face, lifted both hands one final time. The ship responded. Every wall, every circuit, every forgotten system lit up at once. A final pulse of golden energy erupted outward. And the god was engulfed. It screeched, its form flickering faster, breaking apart at the seams. The rift behind it began to close. The god clawed at the walls, desperate to remain. But it was too late. With one final, ear-shattering scream, it was torn away, pulled back into the void. And then, silence. Aftermath. The ship dimmed. The power that had surged through its walls slowly faded, leaving only embers of golden light. The girl staggered. The human caught her before she collapsed. She looked up at him, exhausted but alive. He smirked. "So, you're kind of terrifying when you're mad." She let out a breathless laugh. "I think we won." He glanced around at the destruction. "Yeah, let's hope so." The ship gave one final groan of metal before the systems fully shut down. The war was over. But the story wasn't. The girl turned toward the tunnel leading back to the surface. "We have a city to free." The human grinned. "Let's get to work." Humanity's defiance. A new dawn. The battle was over. But the war was just beginning. The girl and the human stood at the heart of the ancient ship, its golden lights now fading into darkness. The last echoes of the monstrous entity had disappeared through the collapsing rift, banished back to whatever void it had crawled from. Yet outside the temple, outside in the city, the people still lived in fear. The high priest was gone, but his followers remained. The warriors, the nobles, the believers who had never questioned the sacrifices, never questioned the gods. And now, they had seen something impossible. A girl who should have died stood alive. A god who should have been unbeatable had fallen. And for the first time in centuries, the people were afraid of the wrong thing. Not the gods, not the traditions, but the truth. The girl turned to the human, her silver eyes still faintly glowing. "It's not over." The human, wiping blood from his forehead, exhaled. "It never is." Rising from the ruins, they climbed their way back up through the ancient tunnels, the path now filled with cracked stone, broken pillars, and the lingering heat of battle. When they reached the surface, the temple grounds were empty, silent. The torches, once burning bright for the sacrifice, had died out. The ceremonial banners, once billowing in the wind, lay torn and smoldering. But the city beyond, that was still alive. The streets were filled with whispers, murmurs, frightened voices. Doors slammed shut as they emerged. Footsteps retreated into darkened alleyways. The people had seen what happened, and they didn't know what to believe anymore. The girl took a deep breath, her hands clenched at her sides. "They won't follow me," she muttered. "They never have." The human tilted his head. "Then make them listen." She hesitated, looking at the vast crowd gathering at the temple steps. Some warriors still stood there, gripping their weapons, but without the high priest, they lacked purpose. They had no leader. The human nudged her forward. "This is your moment, Hid." She swallowed hard. Then she stepped forward into the light, and the city gasped. The girl who should have died. The people had seen her die. They had watched her chained to the altar, watched as the high priest raised his blade. And yet, she stood before them, alive. She lifted her chin, her voice steady, clear, powerful. "You were lied to." The words rang through the air like a crack of thunder. The people flinched. Some took a step back, others stared, uncertain. The girl continued. "The gods were never watching over us. They were never protecting us. They were using us." The warriors shifted uncomfortably. The elders lowered their gazes. "They took everything from us," she said, voice trembling with rage. "Our history, our future. They made us fear them, worship them, die for them. Her silver eyes burned. But they are gone now. A long silence. Then, a single voice. She speaks blasphemy. The human turned, spotting an elder in the crowd, his face twisted in fear. If we do not offer blood, the gods will return, the man shouted. They will punish us. The people murmured, eyes darting between each other. Fear was powerful. Even now, it still had its claws in them. The human sighed. This again. Before he could step forward, the girl raised a hand. No. Her voice was calm, firm. The gods already returned, she said, and we defeated them. The city fell silent. She turned, gesturing toward the temple, the place where so many had died, where she should have died. No more chains, she said. No more sacrifices. No more fear. She stepped forward, past the hesitant warriors, past the frightened elders, and into the heart of the city. Some people stepped back. Others followed. And that was enough. For the first time, her people were choosing. Not out of fear, but out of hope. The human's final goodbye. As the city slowly woke up from its long nightmare, the human watched from a distance. The girl had done what he couldn't. She had turned survival into revolution. He smirked. Not bad, kid. She turned, walking toward him, her silver eyes thoughtful. You're leaving, aren't you? The human shrugged. You don't need me anymore. She frowned. That's not true. He chuckled. Yeah, it is. You were always meant to leave these people. I was just the guy who got punched a lot along the way. She hesitated. Then, finally, she nodded. You were more than that. The human smirked. Yeah, I was pretty awesome. The girl rolled her eyes, but smiled. And for the first time, he saw not a frightened sacrifice, not a lost child, but a queen. Or something even greater. He turned toward the horizon. Guess I'll see what other trouble's waiting for me out there. The girl took a breath. If you ever need a place to return to. She hesitated. Then, you'll always have one here. The human paused. Then, finally, he grinned. I'll keep that in mind. And just like that, he walked away. Final scene. The dawn of a new era. The girl stood on the temple steps, watching the human disappear down the road, his silhouette fading under the twin moons. Then, she turned back toward the city. The people watched her now, waiting. For guidance, for change. She took a deep breath and stepped forward. The age of fear was over. A new era had begun.